Hi, everybody. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
You are very, very welcome to today's conversation. We are two social scientists with PhDs in various elements of talking about culture. And the reason that we do that and that we're talking to you today is that we both believe deeply that we can all be human a little bit better. And that one of the ways we can human better is by learning about other people's lives different than our own, which is honestly the definition of culture. So we have these conversations here on the YouTube channel or here on the podcast, however you are encountering us, in order to encourage your cultivation of understanding of different people. We have conversations like we are today, which we'll get into in a minute, about conservatorships and what that actually means for the disabled and elderly communities. We also talk about why flags matter so much. We've had conversations about the incredible Netflix show Glow that more people need to be watching, why feminists in the 70s screamed at crystals. There's been a lot of conversations. Can't encourage you enough to entertain them elsewhere. We like to talk to each other all the time. We turn on recording devices for y'all so that we can hear your thoughts and comments on our thoughts and comments. Please don't hesitate to subscribe, like, respond, tweet, send us carrier pigeons, whatever. We want to hear from you about what we're saying.
This video is a part of our hot-ish takes series. Unlike other outlets that love to send you hot takes, we prefer the ish of a take, which means we take our time, do a little research and reflection before we dive into a topic. This is more hot than ish, what we're talking about today, but it's still something we've taken some time to consider and discuss prior to hitting the record button. Today's hot-ish take is a follow-up to our hot-ish take on the New York Times documentary episode Framing Britney Spears that originally aired February 7th. I have it written down. February 7th, 2021. Our hot-ish take, which is linked below, aired on February 12th, 2021. As we record this now, it is July 16th, 2021. We are saying this all for the record, literally, because the case with Britney Spears is evolving so quickly. We'll probably have to update this in another month or so. But our hot-ish take talked about the 1-hour documentary, Framing Britney Spears. We went into a lot of the cultural aspects of what we did as a society to Britney Spears and kind of what the conservatorship is doing. We're not legal scholars. If you would like a legal scholar, our dear, dear friend, Emily Baker, is the best one around on the YouTubes and is covering this in depth. And we learn so much from her and her explanations. We're going to take some of the cultural discussion around what's going on with Miss Britney Jean Spears. But in order to do that first, we need to check in on the road so far. So Dr. Kristen, I mean, things are moving. Things are moving. How are they moving?
They are. So if you're hearing us on the podcast, you've just literally freshly listened to what was going on before. The difference between February and July is massive. So let's get into it really quickly. There is so much legal machinations back and forth, but too long didn't read. As of this week, a judge has allowed Britney to have her own legal representation. This is incredibly important because she hasn't had it for 13 years. So amazing. Everybody has the right to legal autonomy and legal representation. It's literally in the Constitution. So really glad that she gets this now. One of the matters at hand is who is going to be the conservator of her person. So let's break that down really quick. Conservator of the estate is somebody who just manages the legal affairs and the kind of legal, like literally the legal stuff. If you can be incapacitated in any way, sometimes a do not resuscitate claim, or I'm sorry, a living will claim somewhere in the United States will include a conservator of the estate. When you die, you have a conservator of the estate. Those are kind of, that's all the legal stuff. And I've not heard anyone say that Britney wants necessarily out of that piece of the conservatorship. She doesn't want her dad to have anything to do with it, but it doesn't sound like she necessarily wants to manage her own affairs, which if I was worth as much money as she was, I wouldn't either.
No, so I'd pay someone.
I pay somebody, so that sounds fine. Now, how she wants that to look, maybe that's it. The priority to her is the conservatorship of the person. The conservatorship of the person is literally saying that you as a human being, I'll use Aaron and I as examples here. So if Aaron was the conservator of my person, Aaron would have the right to make all of my medical decisions, all of my reproductive decisions. She would have the right to say who I could get in a car with and who I can't. She'd have the right to say when I can go grocery shopping and if I'm even legally allowed to. She would have complete control over my person. For about 11, 12 years of this circus, Britney's conservator of the person is her father, who prior to becoming the conservator of the person, she was estranged from. I am very close to my dad. I want him to have no part of being a conservator of my person.
No.
That's a big old pass.
It's a hard pass.
Hard pass.
Hard pass.
But he has been. Her consistent drumbeat has been to get her father out of the conservatorship entirely. She was successful in getting him, the system. He was removed temporarily as the conservator of her person a little while ago, and a woman named Jody Montgomery was installed, who is a professional fiduciary. And from text messages we've seen and a little bit of even Britney's own testimony as she's been allowed to say things recently, she seems cool with Jody. And it seems like she and Jody would be able to work some stuff out. Even if the conservatorship isn't ended, she seems okay. She wants Jody to stay. She wants Jody as a part of this. So from the consent that we can understand, her big bugaboo is her dad. Let's get rid of her dad. Then let's start getting rid of the conservatorship. She wants to be able to go on a date with her boyfriend without getting 19 signatures, and I can't blame her. So there's a lot of other stuff around this. Her dad appears by both just like my gut instinct of like somebody you're estranged from and then you're worth a whole lot of money and somebody swoops in to take care of you. My gut's like, he's probably not the best guy. But then we've heard her say that she actually wants to sue him. She wants the court to go after him for conservator abuse. She's talked openly about how terrible her whole family is. And that includes actress on one of our favorite shows, Sweet Magnolias, Jamie Lynn, and her mother, who was trying very hard to be neutral, positive in this. But Britney's like, no, they're all terrible. They all just want my money. And I want somebody neutral in this. I want out of this whole thing. So I'm very excited that as of July 14th, the hearing on July 14th, she was allowed her own legal representation. We have no idea where this is going to go forward. But something else that has happened in between February and now is that we've heard from a lot of disability advocates and elder care advocates that all of the narrative around this being a very unique situation is a lie. That this is actually how it's called guardianships in many other states. It's a conservatorship in California, but this is actually really common for disabled, mentally and physically disabled folks and elderly folks here in the United States. And for that kind of piece of this coverage, I'm going to throw it over to Dr. Aaron.
Oh, I thank you so much. Yeah, and it just brought to mind, I think it was Cate Blanchett was in a movie recently where she played a person who manipulated like elder folks.
No, it was Rosamund Pike, and it was on Netflix, I think.
Rosamund Pike. Oh, yeah. Forgive me for confusing tall blonde actresses who are really good at their jobs. Rosamund Pike played like a person who, so we know this type of character, like a person who takes advantage, weasels themselves into a position of trust with a person who is vulnerable either for their age or for a lower cognitive function, lack of understanding, dementia, whatever. So it's not something that we're unfamiliar with, but I don't think until recently we had made the correlation between those types of stories and what's happening with Britney Spears. And I think for me, the thing that's so disconcerting about a conservatorship or a guardianship over a person is the lack of agency and autonomy that a person has.
Yeah.
And, I didn't watch that movie with Rosamund Pike, but I saw the trailer. And she convinces other people that this person is the person that she's in charge of is incapable of making decisions. And I know we've talked about this before online, but one of the really hard parts of a conservatorship is once it's granted, it's really, really hard to convince the legal authorities that it's no longer needed, because the basis of the conservatorship in the state of California is that you are incapable of making decisions for yourself. And so anytime you try to assert agency or control over your life, the courts are predisposed to be biased against you because they have already decided that you are incapable of making those decisions. So it's a really important thing to talk about in understanding the situation that can happen with disabled folks and elder folks around the country and the world that might be in this position. They are vulnerable. They may require some kind of care, or they may appear as though they require care to outside persons, and therefore that can be taken advantage of. And I think, in our first part one of this discussion, when we were talking about the documentary Framing Britney Spears, you did such a great job of explaining purity culture in America and what it is and why it's so toxic and why it framed the way we looked at Britney Spears and other young women performers, still do to this day, TBH, objectified them, became interested and obsessed with their sexuality, their sexual purity, their intimate relationships, you name it. And I see this, like, the loss of autonomy that she has through this conservatorship as like an extension of that. And after I scream at my crystal about her the kind of history of controlling women's reproductive organs, I think if you could talk about the relationship between purity culture and controlling reproduction, that would be cool. But I think for me, that was the most difficult thing that we learned recently from her trial hearings, was that her father, as the conservator of her person, has refused her repeated requests to have her IUD removed because she wants to have more children. He wants her to work. And we learned this from Framing Britney Spears. All he wants her to do is work and make money. He forced her into the residency in Las Vegas. She's like the Energizer Bunny, it appears, to her father. And she just wants to retire, be left alone, and have more kids. And there's a real scary legacy in this country and others of men using legal relationships to control women's bodies.
Yep. And
I mean, the word hysterical that we have is because we had a medical diagnosis of hysteria that the man who was in charge of the woman's person, either her closest male relative or husband, could have her incarcerated, experimented on, medically, psychologically maltreated, if he got a diagnosis of hysteria. And there were women certainly in mental health crises that needed institutional care or medical care. There were lots of women we know who were incarcerated for hysteria that had the audacity to want their own agency, that talked about radical things like having the right to vote or own property or have their own bank account or have mother flipping pockets in their dresses. I don't know why I censored myself there, but I did. It was funny. And I think for me, like, the connections between that and also the pretty scary medical history we have in this country of forced sterilization, particularly of women of color who are exceptionally vulnerable in a lot of situations. Incarcerated women of color, it's even worse. We've even had reports in the last 5 or 6 years of women, undocumented immigrants who are detained on our borders being forcibly sterilized. And, all of this kind of, if you scrape the surface of Brittany's dad says she has to keep her IUD in, there's a whole history of using control over women's reproductive organs to control the woman herself and remove agency and power and choice. And that is disgusting. it always has been and it is now. And the fact that her father claims to love her and is doing this to her is very, very upsetting. And, you know, this is something that we see a lot across the disability rights communities and activists, disabled folks who want to have children or who want to get married or adopt, and having their family's involvement in some of these decisions. And it can be very complicated, obviously, depending on the individual circumstances. But, you know, culturally, it's worth noting that we have ideas of what normal is, quote unquote. And if people don't fit that cultural definition, which always changes and evolves, we have often instituted mechanisms to control them into that definition of normalcy, if that's not possible, to remove them from society so they are not noticed, interfering, whatever, pick an adjective. So I think for me, like, I was really appreciative of the article that you found, again, links below, that talked about conservatorships and guardianships and disability rights and disabled folks and elder folks. Because I hadn't really made that connection. And especially because the discourse around Britney's case is that it's so unique.
Yeah, and I think, that connection was first made for me on a Tumblr post that I scrolled by really quickly and forgot to save. And Tumblr's search engine is, I don't know, built by monkeys. Like, I can't find it again. So I'm very, very grateful that not only did I find that article, thank you, Google, but that one of the YouTubers that I watch for multi-level marketing content is called Cruel World Happy Mind. And she covers kind of conspiracies in general sometimes. And she did a bit of a deep dive into what this means in disability communities. And essentially, like, by the way, Britney isn't special in the way that we've been talking about her. So that video will also be linked below if you'd like I believe it's 30 solid minutes, kind of full exploration. And in terms of purity culture, I'm like gesticulating wildly with my hands for anybody on the podcast, because I struggle to kind of summarize this without a whole heck of a lot of profanity. But fundamentally, the United States, the Western world, the Eastern world, the planet Earth tends to only see women fundamentally as walking wombs.
Walking wombs.
And there's a lot of stuff around that. And so therefore the purity of a woman's body, this is why we get control of weight. This is why we get control of, like, women aren't allowed to have tattoos. This is why women weren't allowed to have pockets. This is what, like, everything is about maintaining the purity of a woman's reproductive possibilities, and the state or men, either or and making reproductive decisions for them for the betterment of the population, the state, the nation that needs to propagate, whatever. That's fundamentally what purity culture means. There's a lot of theology in it. There's a lot of all theologies, by the way. We usually like to blame Christianity, but honestly, it's everywhere. It's in all of them, some way, shape, or form. Even you can find it in Buddhism. It's definitely not as practical, but there's a lot of sexism in Theravada Buddhism, especially. So, like, there's in kind of the practice of it, I should say, the active practice of it. So you can find this everywhere. This is a human thing. Where it shows up here is not only how we've treated Britney as a public entity and a public property, which we repented from in our last coverage because we definitely participated in, but I appreciate that the IUD was so shocking to so many people that, like, that was the headline the next day, that, like, that was the issue. Because it's one of those things that, like, I'm sure when the judge granted the order, it was like nothing was thought of it. Well, if her dad says she can't have kids, if the conservator of her person says she can't have kids, then she can't have kids. That's how it's been forever. Because before there were legal conservators of the person, the man closest to you in your life was the conservator of your person.
Right.
Like, we didn't have women's experiences without conservators of the person until we got the right to vote and the birth control pill. Like, right. In a lot of places around the world, men are still conservators of women's person. We just don't have that legal definition. And so this is where this gets messy, but also really straightforward. Anytime a woman takes control of her own body, it's an act of revolution. Anytime a man gives control of a woman's body to a woman, it's an act of revolution. Anytime in which we assert our own, this is non-binary folks too, trans folks, whenever we say a human person gets control over their own body, it's an act of revolution. Because there's a lot of ways in which the state regulates man's bodies, male bodies as well, especially in times of war, and that's a separate hottish take. But anytime somebody has full autonomy over their person,
it's countercultural.
It's an act of revolution.
Yeah, it's countercultural. It goes against the culture in a lot of ways, unless you are a member of a privileged group. But even then, there are ways in which your bodies are controlled and regulated and stigmatized by society. So
yeah, I mean, we bring it back all the time, but the Marvel male superhero actors say that how incredibly terrible getting their bodies to look like that is. That's still a regulation of body.
Yeah.
And that the culture demands of them. And that's something that, you know, Camille Nanjiani has talked openly about frequently, as has Chris Evans and Henry Cavill and a lot of the other folks that have put their body through things to make all of us thirsty. So it's a thing. And if we could leave you with anything in this particular video, it is to remember that marginalized and under-resourced groups always have state control over them more than you think they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that making your own bodily decisions against culture, like things that actually just feel right to you. So like this goes into anti-diet culture as well, by the way, which is, again, a separate rant. Maybe we'll do a hottish take on my feelings on diet culture soon. That will have the big old explicit.
We should, especially because we just learned about that. The first medical device that was exclusively tested on women was a metal, like a magnet you attach to your teeth to keep your jaw shut so that you lose weight.
Yeah, super, super glad about that. When you're watching this, if you head over to our sister channel, Abby Research Reads, you'll see a review of Jess Baker's book, Things We Don't Tell Fat Girls. That will be a precursor to this evidently inevitable hottish take that we will be doing.
It's happening. We're doing it.
On diet culture. But it's very connected to this. Brittany also talked about being put on a diet. She was not allowed hamburgers, which I think might actually be a human rights violation. Like, let people eat what they want to eat. A lot of this is a human rights violation, as much as I joke, but like it really kind of is. And the way she phrased it is they denied these things to me because they wanted me to feel crazy, and I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Which is a good reminder that when you really just want to eat food, sometimes that being hungry has an effect on your mental health. All of that to say, wherever you are listening to this, if the case has changed, we are absolutely positive that the fundamentals we discussed in this video have not. But we do hope that whenever you're listening to this, Brittany is one step closer to controlling her own body and her own life and interacting with her children and her boyfriend on her terms once again.
Whew, amen. We do know that the next hearing set for her case is in September. So if you're listening to this on the YouTube's live or on our podcast and it is not quite September yet, we might do an update. We don't know. Depends on what they say. Obviously, we have a lot to say about this case and its cultural implications et al. So you probably won't. This probably won't be the last time that you hear from us on this issue. But whenever you hear from us next, that is when we will see you. And take care, everybody.
Bye.